everybody, I'm Zach Collins with Scorpion Racing Products, and today I'm going to answer one of the most frequently asked questions: can I install rocker arms myself? One of the most frequently asked questions we get here at Scorpion Racing Products is, can I install rocker arms myself? The simple answer to that question is yes. You have to have a little bit of confidence and a little bit of mechanical ability, but we do provide installation instructions and do have help videos and documents on our website, www.scorpionracingproducts.com, that you can reference throughout the installation process. You just need a couple simple common hand tools depending on the type of rocker arm you're installing, and I'll review those now. Our highest volume rocker arm is a stud mounted application. So that's an actual stud mounted rocker arm with a trunnion and a through hole in the center. And it comes with an adjusting nut, what we call a poly lock, that has a set screw in the center of it. So you'll simply just need some good assembly lubricant to lube the push rod tips, the push rod seat, and then also the roller and the valve tip once you're installing the rocker on the engine. And then you'll need a 7/32 T-handle Allen wrench to be able to adjust the set screw in the poly lock when you're setting either your preload or your valve lash. And then you'll need a good set of feeler gauges. And the thickness of the feeler gauge you're going to use is dependent on your camshaft manufacturer's recommended setting. So depending on the valve latch that they want, whether it's 18 thousandths, 20 thousandths, 25 thousandths, you'll set the feeler gauge to that number. You'll pick the actual feeler gauge in the set that you have, and then match that to the camshaft manufacturer's recommended lash, and you'll use that to adjust the actual lash on a solid or mechanical cam. If you have a hydraulic cam with hydraulic lifters, you're going to be setting preload, so you won't need feeler gauges. In addition to that, you'll need a 5/8 box end wrench for the hex on the poly lock to be able to turn the poly lock down on your stud. And other than that, you'll need a good torque wrench, high quality torque wrench, and a socket to fit it, which would also be a 5/8 deep well socket. And then you may also need, for a pedestal mount application, an actual hex socket for that to go down into the hex of the Allen bolt that the rocker arm installs with, whether it be metric or standard, a 5/16 bolt or an 8mm bolt. If you're installing our shaft mount rocker arms, you'll need a couple more tools. You'll also still need the torque wrench and the assembly lubricant, but you'll need a couple torque sockets, T40, T45, T47 torque sockets, as well as a ratchet to be able to use those to install not only the stand to the cylinder head, but also the shafts to the stand that's already bolted to the cylinder head to install the rocker pairs in the actual shaft rocker kit itself. Outside of that, you may need, if you're checking geometry, which we recommend, a checking spring. This goes in place of your normal valve spring, has a lot less pressure, so it's easier to rotate the engine over by hand. It doesn't give you as much resistance as the full spring pressure would. If the cylinder head's already on the engine, you may not want to take the valve spring off if you're in fear of the valve dropping down in the cylinder, or you're not familiar with that. You might be able to ask somebody for help, or we also have help videos ourselves that walk you through that entire process. If the engine is already assembled with the cylinder head on the block, you can go ahead and put compressed air in the cylinder, take the spark plug out. They make a special connection that you can actually put an air line right into and have the cylinder filled with compressed air to keep the valves up so they don't drop when you take the keepers off of the valve and the retainer, to be able to pull the old spring off and then put the checking spring on. A couple things: you need good attention to detail. You want to make sure you double check everything. We recommend using a Sharpie or a felt tip pen to mark each rocker arm as you've gone through the adjustment and installation process, so you know which rockers have already been adjusted and installed and which ones still need to be installed correctly. Outside of that, you need to check your clearances. Clearances meaning interference that the rocker body or anything in the rocker assembly may have with another part on the engine. You want to make sure the push rod doesn't have any interference with the back of the rocker arm body throughout the entire range of motion. You want to make sure the underside of the nose of the rocker arm and anything around the valve and retainer and spring area on the roller side of the rocker arm has no interference. Some retainers are taller than others. Some valves don't have as long a tip length as others, and the valve actually sinks down into the retainer. So you want to check and make sure the roller is actually contacting the valve tip and not any other parts interfering. You can massage these parts a little bit if needed. Our rockers come pre-clearanced for 1.625" diameter valve springs. Some of the common ways you can gain more clearance there is to use -50 keepers, which is a special set of valve locks or keepers that move the retainer 50 thousandths down. As long as you have enough spring height to do that and you don't get close to coil bind, that's an option. Or another option is to use a lash cap that sits on top of the valve itself that gives you roughly about another 50 thousandths of height between the valve tip and the actual roller of the rocker arm. Another area to check is the underside of the rocker arm. For stud mounted applications, the rocker slides over a stud, so you want to make sure that the rocker is actually high enough up on the stud to where the bottom edges of the bottom slot in the rocker arm aren't contacting any part of the stud and rubbing on the hex or the actual shoulder of the stud itself. Those are the most common areas for interference. Outside of that, when you're installing the rocker arms, if you want to double check your geometry, make sure the pivot length is good. Make sure your installed height is good on your spring. Make sure you don't have any retainer to seal clearance issues. Make sure you don't have any coil bind issues. That's when you would use the checking spring and roll the engine over by hand to check the pattern that the valve leaves on the valve tip to make sure that it's on center and less than 80 thousandths wide. That's what we recommend. If you have an older set of rocker arms that you've had sitting in the garage for a few years that you've just now unboxed, you're gonna wanna soak those in oil. Sometimes the grease that comes in the bearings starts to plasticize and turns a little hard. So you wanna soak the rockers in oil if they've been sitting for a couple years on the shelf before you put them in to make sure everything's nice and wet and pre-lubricated before you fire the engine up. Also, you wanna make sure that in addition to that, you have a current copy of our installation instructions. So you have an older set of rocker arms, you want to go to our website, www.scorpionracingproducts.com, and download or view the most recent copy of our installation instructions, as they may have changed since your rocker set was sold. That's really all there is to it. As long as you have some self-confidence and can use our help documents to be able to guide you through the process, it's a pretty straightforward process. And the good thing is, once you install the first rocker arm, there's only 15 more to go on a V8, and they're all identical as far as the installation procedure. And we're always available on our tech line. You can call in at 352-512-0800 and ask for tech support, and we can also walk you through the process over the phone as well. I hope this video has been helpful. Thank you.